Hello and welcome to another episode of Reading Reddit with Amber. Today we're heading over to the subreddit r/LetsNotMeet. I will warn you, some may find these stories disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. Also, I add some creepy music in the background for these videos. Because the intensity of the music varies depending on whether you're using headphones or not, I have made both a headphones version and a headphones-free version. You're listening to the headphones version. If you want the headphones-free version, click to the link off to the side or in the description. And now, without further ado, let's jump right into the stories. So our first story is, I'm Glad I Thought to Run. So this happened a while back. I was probably around 10 or 11 years old, meaning my brother, we will call him Alex, was around 8 to 9 years old. We were walking home from the bus, which takes about 7 minutes to do, when I noticed something was off. I didn't see anything at first, but I just knew something was wrong. So my brother and I start walking home, as the only two who got off at our stop were him and I. This blue and silver beat-up truck drives past us, and I think nothing of it. It never slowed down or stopped, it just kept going. Alex and I were holding hands, as my grandmother always told me to do with him, as he's my baby brother and I want nothing to happen to him. Nothing happens at first, but then the same truck drives around again, driving our way this time. There was a cul-de-sac at the end of our road. It was driving slower this time and went up the road and turned out of sight. Now Alex and I were nearing the three-way intersection that connected the cul-de-sac road to the other side road, right off the main road the man just drove down. I happened to look down the street and see the truck driving, real slow, down the street towards us again. I knew we had to run. I knew there was no other option. I knew that if we didn't, my brother and I would not be safe. I don't know how I knew, but I did. As soon as we passed the house that blocked us from view, I turned to Alex and spoke to him exactly 4 words. No questions, just run. And we did. In our driveway, which is about 100 feet long by the way, there is a row of bushes and pine trees that divide our home from the next door neighbor. I dragged him in there and told him to be quiet and I'd explain later. I watched as the same truck drove down and around the cul-de-sac again before coming to a stop, right in front of our house. I had to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was crying and I was scared that whoever was following us would hear him and hurt us. I was more worried for him than for myself at this point. I was in fight or flight mode. I was the big sister. I had to protect him. I looked at him and said that the truck was following us, and I told him not to be scared. I said I wouldn't let anyone hurt him, and it seemed to calm him down a little. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the door to the truck opened and out came a man. He was tall, skinny, and messy, short hair covered by a torn baseball cap, ripped jeans and shorts, and a puke green tank top. He entered our yard and looked around a bit. Alex and I were still in the bushes and I was trying to find a way to get to our house safely without getting this dude's attention. The guy left after what felt like forever and entered his car. He started it and drove away slowly. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was gone before turning to my brother and saying, "We need to run. When I count to 3, we are going to run behind the house to the back door, okay?" He agreed and we waited a few more seconds before I started counting. I still didn't have a good feeling about this, but I knew we had to move. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. As soon as I hit 3, we booked it across our driveway and onto our front yard to go around the house. As soon as we left our spot, I heard it, the sound of accelerating. He saw us. He was waiting for us to leave. He chased us up our driveway as we ran around the side. I grabbed Alex's hand and practically dragged him around the house and made him run ahead to the garage door to see if it was locked while I searched for my house key. The garage door was open. I swear to God I saw this man round the opposite corner of the house that we did as I entered the house. We entered and I slammed it shut, locking it and deadbolting it. I didn't stop running until I opened the house door and ran downstairs with Alex, screaming our safe word. My grandmother made a safe word for us that was a normal everyday word that we could use if we were in danger, just had to scream it basically. It woke my aunt who worked the night shift and was sleeping. We told her everything and she stayed up with us until my grandmother got home. We called the police and that was my first ever interaction with an officer. The man was never caught. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I'm sure it wasn't good. I'm just glad my grandma drilled stranger danger into my head. I don't know where my brother or I would be right now if she hadn't. So, to the messy man in the blue and silver truck, let's not meet again. Our next story is called Pizza for the Ranch. On my first summer back home from freshman year of college, I picked up a part-time job delivering pizza in a town around 30 minutes away from where I lived. The area, in rural Georgia, is known for having places that are in the middle of nowhere, and the pizza place's whole shtick was that it would deliver to even the most remote areas imaginable within the town limits. I could fill books with the weird experiences that summer, from the call that came from a long abandoned warehouse to the dog that got excited about the pizza in my hand and accidentally shredded my pants with her claws, but one will always stand out in my mind as the creepiest. It was getting fairly late at night, around 10:30 p.m., so I was confident at this time I would be sent on no further calls before closing at 11. However, someone barely managed to miss the cutoff time, and our clerk accepted their order since they were so close. I was given the address and a single box of hot dough and sent on my merry little way. The first red flag was the driveway, or rather the lack thereof. There was a mailbox, but no actual driveway, not even gravel. It was just grass, and a barely distinguishable trodden pathway that resembled more of a service trail than it did something frequently used. I bumped along, wondering if I was even en route to the place, when I saw a slightly above average sized house come over the horizon, horribly dilapidated and completely surrounded by overgrown woods. I guesstimated where the rest of the driveway led and ended up parking in a grassy patch that could have been the walkway, just as easily as it could have been the front yard, headlights aimed toward the porch as per company policy. I walked up to the door, but I believed that calling it a door is generous. It was a door frame all right, but the door itself was just a large slab of wood propped haphazardly against the side of the house, barely covering the entrance. This was red flag number 2. The third and fourth red flag were also on the door. This included the A4 sheet of printer paper with the words "Around Back" scribbled in all caps, which was hanging just below the place where somebody had self-engraved the door with the title Manson Family Ranch. Typically, I would never go around the back of a house, especially a shady, unlit house, and especially at night. However, it was my last drop of the day, and I was ready to get it over with and be on my way home. Against my better judgment, I traipsed around to the back of the house. The door back here was an actual door, but it was covered in both cobwebs and fresh spider webs. Clearly, this was a door that had not been used in some time. I found the cleanest area available and knocked. I counted to 45 and knocked again. There were no lights on in the house, and I could hear no movement from inside. I knocked and counted again and repeated the sequence 3 more times before I was finally creeped enough to the side to run to my car. As I turned, I finally heard a voice coming from inside the house, clearly agitated, but I couldn't tell what they're saying. I tried to knock one more time, and as I was counting, I heard something in the woods behind me. It started out as just movement deep in the trees, but soon enough I could make out distinct running footsteps coming directly toward me through the brush. As I'm standing there, coming to terms with my impending demise, I follow the direction of the noise to the edge of the woods, which is around 15 feet away from me. In the moonlight, I could clearly see the woman who stepped out. She was relatively old, maybe in her 60s, I would guess. She had long, blonde-gray hair, which was tangled and matted and hung down past her hips. She was in what looked to be originally a white nightgown, but at that time it was dingy and closer to a beigeish-brown color. She was absolutely barefoot, and her feet were covered in dirt and what had to be blood, presumably due to the fact that she had just sprinted through the prickly woods where there was no trail to be seen. I never learned her name, but I still affectionately refer to her as Red Flag number 5. She stopped short when she saw me and started to shake her head no, eyes wide. I stood there like a terrified deer in the most effed up headlights ever, as she took a few more steps toward me, reaching out to me, finger pointed. Her voice came out way stronger than mine would have been at the time when she spoke. You know how southern people can either sound like loving grandmas or backwards murderers? Well, she sounded like the latter when she drawled, "Oh, no, 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 no. No, honey, no. You get on. Get on out of here." I wish I could say I listened, I ran, I left, but I was so in shock at how events were playing out that my own self-preservation was put on a back burner while I tried to figure out just what in the Kentucky Fried Frick was happening. She seemed to realize that I was not moving, even if I could not make my mouth move to ask her what was happening, or even what to do with the stupid pizza in my hands. She looked at me like she could have smacked the heck out of me right then and there, and proceeded to deliver red flags 6 through 12. "Darling, did you hear me? You deaf or dumb? Young girls like you come out here, and they don't get to leave." So I finally quit being the white person in a horror movie when I realized that this was not a funny little ghost story. This was 5'3", 116-pound me potentially being targeted to be robbed or kidnapped or worse. So I dropped the dumb little pizza, which had serious serial killer toppings by the way, and started running back to my car, which I had stupidly left on and unlocked, as was usual for most of my deliveries. As I neared the car, I heard a slam from behind me, and I looked over my shoulder to see that the wooden door had been pushed over and had fallen onto the porch beneath it. As I was closing the car door, an older man was limping down the front steps, waving his arms like an airplane runway attendant at me, calling me a little jerk, telling me to get out of the effing car now. At a loss for what to do, I called out something muttery and shaky along the lines of, "Pizza's out back." I floored my dad's lousy little 90s Lexus and somehow managed to avoid the trees on the odd trail back to the main road, which was still 12 miles and several turns from any road that actually had a name, let alone painted lines. I reported it to my manager, and he said he contacted the police, but nothing ever came of it that I'm aware of. Either way, that was my first, and hopefully last, personal encounter with the self-proclaimed Manson family ranch. Our last story is simply titled The Phone Call, the Light Bulb, and the Test Drive. 2.5 years ago, I was what you might call the right hand for my boss, who owned the motel that I worked for, technically as head housekeeper. But I had recently begun training to run the full spectrum of the motel, including all things office and front desk, overseeing staff and minor maintenance so that my boss could take a vacation. It was a 42-room mom-and-pop place set back off the road, so it was pretty peaceful for the most part. There was still a few motley ones every now and then, but that's any motel in small-town USA. But as intimidating as the new responsibility sounded, with only 2 other staff members to worry about, it was a cakewalk. The day comes for the boss to take her leave, and I'm now in charge of her life's blood, sweat, and tears, and pumped for the opportunity to show what I was made of. She left Friday morning, and the rest of the day ran like clockwork, until around 8:30 that night. I also lived on the property in an apartment which allowed me to run back and forth to the office for guest check-ins and any office duties I needed to tend to. So when the Ring doorbell alerted, I looked at my phone and saw an older gentleman, early 60s maybe, staring through the door looking for an attendant. I spoke through the camera to let him know that I'd be there in 30 seconds and then started on my way to the office. As I would with any guest while checking them in, I made small talk about his trip and gave the lowdown on where the good food in town was. I got him squared away on the computer and showed him how to get to his room. As he was getting his credit card situated in his back wallet, I thanked him for staying with us and called him Mr. Logan. He looked up at me and smiled and said I should call him Joe, and made his way out of the office. Less than 30 minutes had passed and I get a call from room 135, Joe's room. He proceeds to tell me that he would like to use the desk lamp, but there is no light bulb in it and could he please get one, which immediately threw up a red flag because I cleaned that room myself and I made it a habit to check every light bulb in the room and knew for a fact that the light bulb was there because I used the desk lamp as I was cleaning. I told him I would bring one down and he immediately said he would rather come to the office to get it. The office was attached to an apartment-type space that my boss lived in during the week, and it was very dark in the back and set up in a way that would have made it very difficult, if not impossible, to see through the door to the apartment. Considering I was the only employee on the property, having him come to my very secluded office in the dark wasn't going to happen. I felt more comfortable taking it to his room. This was an old drive-up style setup, where I knew there were other guests around that area that were sitting outside and could help me if I needed it. So when he says he would rather come to the office, I told him I would have to bring it to him because my boss would kill me if I made a guest change a light bulb. He says he understands and I breathe a little easier. He's not going to get me cornered in my secluded office to do God knows what. I grab the light bulb and before I can get to the front door, I look and there he is looking through the glass on the door, staring me down in the most unsettling way. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I physically started shaking. I opened the door and just said, "Let's get your lamp working," and started walking past him. He then said he thinks he forgot to sign his credit card receipt and can we go back to double check? I tell him I had already dropped the receipt but that I would check in the morning and get it from him if I needed it. That was total garbage. He made a big deal about finding his good pen to sign it with. We both knew he signed it. With that rejected idea, we continued to his room. As I walked in, I kicked the doorstop wedge I brought with me under the door so it couldn't close without assistance. And had he tried, I would have had time to call for help from the guys next door to him. I think he figured that out and moved away from the door. As I put the bulb in the lamp and turned to leave, I noticed the original light bulb halfway sticking out from under the couch pillow. I picked up my pace, chose to say nothing, and left. I made sure that he didn't see where I went because I sure didn't want him to know that I lived there or which apartment was mine. 30 minutes later and the phone rings again. Of course, it's Joe. This time he would like a little extra coffee for in the morning. I tell him that I'm unable to get into the housekeeping supply room because the housekeeper accidentally took it home. Total lie. But I wasn't going back over there. He had me legitimately scared. He called 2 more times that night, but I changed my voicemail to the motel's information and let him leave a message. I never even checked them. Bad customer service for my first night running the place alone, but I really didn't think my boss would entertain the idea of penalizing me after she heard the whole story. The next morning starts out quiet as usual. I was running audit when Joe shows up at the door. I wasn't scared this time because one of my housekeepers was getting coffee in the kitchen, and I had people coming and going and checking out. Joe asked me to go have breakfast with him. I explained that I'm on the clock and have a business to keep afloat for my boss, but thank you for the offer. I'm not sure exactly what went down the next 2 hours because I was working, but somewhere in there, Joe's car quit working. He was trying to go to the next town over, which is significantly bigger than my town, for one reason or another. Anyway, he starts getting unreasonably angry that his car won't start and saying things like, "How am I supposed to do this without a flipping car?" and whatnot. Then it dawns on him that there is a car dealership next door and he starts off in that direction. But before he gets too far away, he sees me coming out of a room and says, "You're gonna marry me, just wait and see. We're going to Vegas." All while smiling and chuckling. So I chuckled too because there's no way he is being serious. I hoped. I continued on with my day. About 5 hours pass and I get a phone call from the dealership asking if Mr. Logan had checked out. I said he was booked for one more night, and the man at the dealership proceeds to tell me that Joe took a car for a test drive and was supposed to return in 30 minutes, but hadn't returned and is not answering phone calls. They asked if I could check his room to see if his belongings were still there. I obliged. I opened his door after knocking with no response and found the room completely destroyed. Papers all over the place. Trash on the floor, pictures off the wall, the whole 9. But I wasn't sure if the papers were something he would come back for or if he bailed and just left that stuff behind. Aside from the papers, the only other personal belongings were a pair of swim trunks and a pair of socks. Again, was that worth coming back for? So I tell the dealership that I'm not 100% sure he's coming back, and they call the police. After another couple of hours, the police show up at the motel, Joe in tow. I had decided since he paid up until the next day, I would just leave his stuff in there in case he returned, which I honestly didn't think would happen. He goes in and starts taking his things out of the room. That's when the cop comes up to me, and being a small town, knows me and pulls me aside. He says, "OP, you need to thank God every night that you're still alive and well here." I said, "Okay, but what makes you say that?" He said, "That man had every intention of taking you with him tonight and going somewhere you'd never be looked for in. I don't know that he would have let you live. He's a sick man. We're taking him for a psych eval and then to the county if he's okay for the general population." He then says I should call my boss and let her know what was happening and maybe take my own vacation for a few days just in case they can't make the car theft thing stick, since the dealership no longer wanted to press charges given his psychological state and that was technically the only law he broke. They also said they would patrol the motel every hour or so to check on me if he is released. I was completely taken aback by the whole ordeal, and to this day wonder how he planned on getting me out of there and what he was going to do if he did. He was released after 24 hours, but I never saw him again. And I'm okay with that. Someone in the comments asked OP how the police knew he was planning on abducting her, and she said, "He actually told the cop he was going to take me." In his state of mind, he thought he had that right apparently. That's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider giving it a like or let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching and have a great day.